Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. Next up on our team previews, we're going to be looking at the Texas Longhorns. And joining us on the channel today to discuss a little bit more about the Longhorns is Eric Henry. Eric, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on, man.
Before we get started with the position group preview here for the Longhorns, Eric, please tell our viewers where they can find your content.
You can find me on Twitter, I guess X, as the cool kids now at Eric C. Henry underscore. You can find my Texas football, Texas basketball, Texas baseball coverage at horns247.com on all social media at horns247. And let's see, YouTube, flagship podcast, Horns 24/7 podcast. That is Wednesdays at 9 a.m. And if you happen to be in Texas, in the Central Texas area, you can catch me every Thursday on AM 1300 at 7:35 a.m.
Well, Eric, you're certainly a busy guy and you have a lot of great content. So everyone make sure to go check out Eric's content there. Looking at the Longhorns for this season, obviously one of the most talented teams in college football. And in fact, speaking of Texas and their schedule and playing Ohio State, that game just got announced as a location for College Game Day for that week one matchup just a couple of hours ago. So we'll discuss that game and the schedule here for the Longhorns later in this preview. But looking at, we'll start at quarterback, Arch Manning. I mean, he's going to be obviously one of the most talked about guys in college football this year. What's the expectation for Arch Manning? And then how do you think this offense now will look with Manning?
The expectation, Connor, somewhere between Heisman and national championship. No, um, excuse me, fighting off a cold here. It depends on who you ask, to be honest with you. I mean, listen, I'm not going to sit here and beat around the bush, right? There is certainly a measure of the Texas fan base who a vocal minority would probably be the way to describe it, although that minority tends to grow, it tends to grow little by little, who believe that Texas would have been better off with Arch Manning at quarterback than Quinn Ewers over the last few years. I am not in that camp. I think Quinn Ewers, quite frankly, didn't get enough credit for the things he brought to the table, specifically in 2023, and of course, was banged up in 2024, so you didn't see the best of him. But what Arch Manning will need to do, and I think you got a little taste of it, really go and watch that first start against Louisiana Monroe. I think that's the start to look at, right? A lot of people can look at the Mississippi State game. That's when they had a chance to really, kind of work out the kinks and see what they could do. But in that first start, Connor, they really want to push the ball downfield because that is Arch Manning's strength. He throws a great deep ball. Texas wants to push the ball downfield. It's not that they're going to, chuck it, throwing Hail Marys all the time. But one of the primary complaints from Longhorn fans with Quinn Ewers that he wasn't the best deep ball thrower, right? For point of reference, if you look at Quinn's, last 2 years as a starting quarterback, completed of his attempts that traveled more than 20 yards in the air was somewhere around, like 18, 19% of those passes being completed. For point of reference, if you look at Jaden Daniels, of course, the, Washington Commanders star quarterback, you take a look at his last year in college, he was nearly at 60%, at 58 and change in terms of completing passes, would travel 20 yards or more in the air, right? So you're probably looking for somewhere in the middle because the FBS average is right around 30 to 35%. If Arch Manning can be that or even a little bit better, you're going to get a more explosive Texas offense. That's for sure, right? So I think, to answer your original question as far as expectations, I joked about the Heisman thing. I mean, there are some people who legitimately believe that Arch is just primed to take off, and that may be the case. I'm not shorting Arch, but he is also a first-time starting quarterback with only 2 starts under his belt and 10 quarters of play. I'm looking at him to be, if I give you a statistical kind of measuring point, should probably be around 3,500 yards and maybe adding another 500 to 600 yards. Let's say 500 yards because I think that feels a little high because Steve Sarkisian is not going to run his quarterbacks, right? So maybe another 400 or 500 yards on the ground. I think those are reasonable expectations for Arch Manning.
And perhaps a handful to maybe several rushing touchdowns in short yardage situations because Arch Manning has that kind of frame. We saw he was used obviously in some short yardage situations from this past season. I would not be shocked to see Manning be used in the running game in those situations. So in regards to the players he's going to be throwing the ball to. Obviously, Ryan Wingo, very talented receiver. He's probably going to be the alpha, at least wide receiver one here. But take me through the rest of this receiving core, and then, of course, if you want to throw out maybe like any hot takes you have for Ryan Wingo, go ahead there. But is DeAndre Moore maybe going to be wide receiver two here?
mean, I'll start with my hot take on Ryan Wingo. I had some people, who watched my appearance on Cover Three, some Ohio State fans, some Alabama fans, who took a little bit of issue when I said that had Ryan Wingo received the number of targets that a Ryan Williams or Jeremiah Smith received, last year, that he would have put up similar numbers. Well, I would just tell those people who think that I'm just making stuff up to go do the statistical analysis. Ryan Wingo was an offense where it was ball distribution. You had a Matt Golden, you had an Isaiah Bond, you had a Gunnar Helm, right? And that's not saying that, Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State didn't have Emeka Ibuka and others, right? But Ryan Wingo will now be stepping into a role where he'll be the wide receiver one, right? So I do expect him to take a major leap this year. Yes, DeAndre Moore is going to be the wide receiver two. Demo tends to work out of the slot for the most part. Most Texas fans be familiar with Jordan Whittington. That's the role he fills, right? That slot receiver can get open there, also plays a role in run blocking from the receiver position. Keep an eye on Emmett Mosley, a transfer from Stanford. He should be the other starting receiver, and I'll give you a couple of names for Texas has recruited the receiver position really well. Khalil Lockett, Jamie French, Dalen McCutcheon. I would also keep an eye on Parker Livingstone. Kid who's a redshirt freshman from Lovejoy, if memory serves me correct, Lovejoy, Texas, 6'4", would actually, if he were to earn a starting role, which doesn't look like he will this year, but if he were to earn a starting role, he'd be the tallest starting receiver, I believe he's 6'5", actually, the tallest starting receiver in Steve Sarkisian's tenure as a head coach. Right. So it brings a size dynamic to the offense. And also, I could just say at tight end, because we shouldn't just focus on the receivers. Jack Endries, Gunner, is a kid that Jack Endries, Connor is a kid that I'm really high on. He's replacing Gunner Helm. That's where I was going with that.
Hey, I'm okay being called Gunner. I mean, he did a great job. That'd be okay. I'm okay with that light being shed on me. Go ahead.
That's where I was going with that. He's replacing Gunnar Helm, who of course set the single season program record for receiving yards and receptions by a tight end last year. I expect Jack Endries to fill in really well.
Yeah, this to be obviously one of the best receiving cores in the country, and they're very deep. And as you mentioned, they've got a lot of star incoming freshmen as well. So this room is going to be great for years to come. So the offensive line and it has a high bar to clear to be as good as what it's been the last couple of years. There's a lot of experience to replace here, but there are some guys that have been around for a while that look like they're going to be starters this season, especially in the interior. I mean, DJ Campbell, I believe he was a former five-star, very highly recruited out of high school. He might be the starting right guard, and then of course center has some depth here. The offensive tackles look like will be maybe Brandon Baker, Trevor Gooseby, who did a really good job when he came in at times last year against A&M and Georgia. So, and those were quality pass rushes from those two squads last year. So yeah, Eric, take me through this offensive line and then answer me the question of, is this a position group of significant question, or do you think it's just maybe an extremely high bar to clear that they may not clear from last year's group?
I mean, it's certainly a very high bar. The best way I'd sum up this offensive line group is high on talent, low on experience. I mean, you pretty much nailed it, Connor. We can go from left to right. You're going to have Trevor Gooseby, and you hit the nail on the head, right? When left tackle Kelvin Banks went down last year, Gooseby was thrust into the spotlight against A&M. Did a hell of a job. Had to play against A&M. Had to play against Georgia. Played a little bit of right tackle when Cameron Williams went down, right? So, he's got some experience there. He's should more or less, I mean, barring some unforeseen circumstances, going to be your left tackle. Keep it on Nato Umazulu at left guard. That's more than likely going to be your left guard. DJ Campbell's going to be your right guard. That's not a maybe. It's a shoe in there. And like you touched on, DJ was a 5-star recruit in the same class as Banks. Actually graded higher by 24/7 Sports than Kelvin Banks, but just took him a little bit more time to round into his position. Played a little bit of tackle in high school, so made the move inside to guard. He's pretty much in the best shape of his career at this point, coming at 332 pounds coming out of the spring. Right tackle, yeah, Nick Brooks is a kid, a true freshman out of Georgia who made a strong impression, but I think it'd be a bit, a tall task for a true freshman to come in. And not that they haven't done it before. They obviously did it with Kelvin 3 years ago, but the roster was, much different in terms of talent where it was then that Kelvin can step in and play as opposed to where it is now, right? So I think Brandon Baker is going to be your right tackle. In that center, you're probably looking at Cole Hudson. Cole started in 2022 as a true freshman at left guard, actually kind of being a rotational guy in the interior of the offensive line over the last 2 years.
So, do you think this offensive line still has the chance to be a top five offensive line, or would you set the bar just a tad bit lower to start things off with some of the youngsters that are stepping up?
This is how I like to measure these things, Connor. I don't measure them in sacks allowed, because here's the thing, right? For example, with Quinn Ewers, there were some times that Quinn could have the ball out of his hands, and that wasn't necessarily a sack on the offensive line, right? With Arch Manning, I'll be curious because, as I mentioned, Steve Sarkisian's been adamant. He is not about to go run option football with his quarterback, no matter how athletic Arch Manning is, right? Does that mean that Arch, who does like to throw the ball downfield, and Steve will try to throw the ball downfield with him, does that mean they're hanging on to the football a little bit longer? Because with Quinn, he was a point guard. Get the ball in his hands, get it out, right? I'm saying all that to say, if you're measuring, comparing the last 2 years to 2025 by sack totals, they could achieve that. I could see that. I would really, and I know it's not the sexy thing to say, I really want to see how this year's offensive line fares in the run game in situational football, because that's been the area where they've struggled. All you have to do is watch the Ohio State game last year.
Yeah.
Why did Ohio State, go ahead, Connor.
Oh, I was going to say Oklahoma in 2023 in the red. Oh,
There you go.
yeah.
Right?
So, and I guess we'll let that be the transitioning point here to the running back room and overall the running game. Do you think this running game can be more explosive? Wisner's back. He ran for over 1,000 yards, but just averaged about 4.8 yards per carry. Do we think it can be more explosive? And then B, do you think it can be more effective in those short yarded situations, especially in the red zone?
We're really going to need to be, because this short yardage situational football has been not just a 1 year thing, it's a 2 year thing. Even going back to 2022, they've had some situational struggles, and you can cheap plug, go check out articles that I've written on the website because I've written them since I've been covering Texas. They're going to need to be, right? They really need to be better in those situational football, short yardage, getting in the red area, things of that nature. As far as explosiveness, I do think they have the potential to be more explosive. Jaden Blue was the home run hitter last year. The issue was Jaden had issues hanging on to the football. Right. Yeah, that's the one way. Tashard Choice, former Texas running backs coach, not going to put you out there if you're not hanging on to the football. But he was supposed to be the home run hitter. Quintravian Wisner, when we spoke with him during the spring, talked about the fact that, and it was very clear watching him, he wasn't that comfortable in the open field making a guy miss. He was like, I just want to hang on to the football. I want to get, my 10 yards, maybe put my shoulder down, but I didn't necessarily want to make a guy miss. He feels more comfortable making a guy miss in the open field, and that should lead to more explosiveness. Also, CJ Baxter. I'm really high on CJ, was the former nation's #1 overall recruit at running back, coming off a big time knee injury. We all know, usually takes a little while to come back from those things. Didn't participate in spring camp. If he can be ready to go by fall, I think Texas running game will be in great shape.
What is the expectation for the tight end room? Do we think that there's going to still be a lot of production here, or do you think it's going to be more leaning on the receivers this year?
Steve Sarkisian's always been high on using his tight ends. They brought in Jack Endries to be a guy who can catch north of 40 passes. I'd say probably closer to 50 passes, just like JT Sanders did for 2 years, just like Gunnar Helm did, right? So the expectation is that the tight end room is not going to drop off. You're still going to see multiple tight ends. Spencer Shannon, Jordan Washington, but the starter will be Jack Endries for sure.
Last question here for the offense before we move to the Texas defense. If the Texas offense is elite, like top five in the nation this year, and it's one of the top position groups in the country, it's because of blank.
Do you repeat the question, Connor? I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, if the Texas offense is elite this year, it's because blank either stayed healthy or because blank broke through.
I'm gonna pivot. The offense is elite if they can complete the deep ball, because that's been the thing that's been missing over the last 2 years. Steve Sarkisian, make no bones about it. You can say whatever you want to say about him, as far as previous 10 years and the old 7-win Sark nickname. He's broken out of that. 25 wins in 2 years. He's an elite football coach, an elite offensive mind. The one thing that's been missing is just the ability to push it downfield consistently. If they can hit that, like I said, even at a 1/3 clip, they'll be elite.
And talking about the Texas offensive line, those short yardage situations, it's going to be a really interesting matchup against Ohio State because Ohio State has a lot to replace on the defensive line, and defensive tackle for Ohio State is probably their biggest question. So that'll be an interesting matchup there with the Longhorns offensive line against the Buckeye defensive line to start things off in week one. Moving over to the Texas defense. I mean, this defense was fantastic last year, and they returned some of their better players, including Colin Simmons, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill. So take me through. We'll start up front here with the defensive line. Obviously, Simmons is a freak. He's going to be one of the best defensive players in college football this coming year. But what's the depth looking like, especially on the interior this year?
That's where it's at. I mean, and I don't mean this to dismiss the edges, but Texas's edges are pretty much set, right? Colin Simmons, Ethan Burke, that's set. They have other guys, Colton Vasek is a guy they're high on. Brad Spence, Trey Moore. They have other guys who can pass rush. It's the interior defensive line is the area that you want to keep an eye on because they've had to again retool this thing through the transfer portal. Let's run down all the names. You got Murad Watson, they bring in from Syracuse, the freshman All-American. Cole Brevard from Purdue. Travis Shaw. I mean, just the list goes on. Hero Canoe from Ohio State. I'll focus in on, Watson again, that type of talent coming in, being a freshman All-American. They're very high on him. Levon Johnson from Maryland. The two guys I think, as far as transfers, and I'll get to a returner in a second to keep an eye on, but as far as transfers, I think are going to make this room are Cole Brevard, 6'3", it was played at 333 at Purdue, listed at 353 during spring with Texas, run stuffer. They expect him to be that run stuffer, that stereotypical traditional nose guard. If he can be that guy, that Bill Norton from last year, that's going to be huge.
Syracuse
Travis
folks were
Shaw,
not happy that they lost Watson. I mean, he stood out for them this past spring. So yeah.
there you go. Travis Shaw was a 5-star recruit at North Carolina coming out 3 years ago, right? Had a couple off-field issues. You can take a look at those, on your own time. One was underage drinking and some others. Also battled some weight and some knee injuries. He appeared to finally be turning the corner, right, last year. If they can get a semblance of his 5-star talent, I think that's going to be huge for Texas. A returner to keep an eye on is Alex January. He's a legacy kid, played at a big-time program up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Duncanville High School. Excuse me, at Duncanville High School. He was kind of that freshman who emerged from the pack last year to actually beat out a 50-year player in Tia Savea from Arizona, who they brought in to be in that rotation. Alex January ended up getting his snaps towards the end of the year, so keep an eye on him.
And this will be a loaded Texas defensive line and a loaded Texas linebacker room, obviously, with Anthony Hill highlighting that group. But take me through the rest of these guys. What is the outlook for the Texas linebackers this fall?
If you want another hot take, I'll give you one. It's my belief. Anthony Hill and Leonga Lafau, if we're just playing a 2 linebacker base, which of course, Texas, for the most part, their base is a 4-2-5 look, and as most teams do when you spread out, playing spread football, I would take those 2 linebackers over any duo in the nation, quite frankly. I could spend this entire segment talking about Anthony Hill. So I'll put him to the side for a second. We talk about the rest of the guys. Leonga Lafau was a former, believe Leonga was a 4-star recruit, might have been a 5-star, forgetting off the top of my head right now, but kid out of Hawaii. Former Texas linebacker coach Jeff Choate called him elite in pass coverage, which is the perfect compliment for Anthony Hill Jr., right? Anthony Hill is going to look to make those plays at the line of scrimmage and also rush the quarterback. Leonga Lafau is going to be that other linebacker. Keep an eye on Trey Moore. You're talking about a guy who was the American Athletic Conference Defensive Player of the Year with UTSA. This year, at least in spring, Connor, he's listed at linebacker. I'm curious if he's going to be a linebacker slash edge, where depending on situationally how they want to use him, because of course Trey naturally is a pass rusher. Kid who had, I believe, if I can remember the number off the top of my head, I want to say it was 29 and a half sacks in 2 years at UTSA. So they're going to look to get more out of him, but also maybe utilize him in different ways as a stand-up linebacker. Brad Spence, also from Arkansas, a transfer, who played well against Texas. I believe he had 7 tackles and a sack against Texas in that game in Fayetteville. Those are going to be the guys who are going to round out that linebacker room.
Yeah, and you were talking about Trey Moore there. So when he transferred in from UTSA, he owned the UTSA record for single season sacks. He had 14 in 2023. Yeah, so yeah, he's a really good player. And when I think it goes to say when he is not like the most talked about player for a team, that just goes to show the talent that they have at the top. And obviously, Texas is no short of talent. So it's yeah, it's no surprise there with the Longhorns and their depth here at multiple positions. Moving on to the secondary, this was an elite group last year, and it will probably be just as good as last year. But take me through this group. Do you think that this group do you think that the back end of the Texas defense can be as good as what they were in 2024?
Yes, I do. Now they are going to have some shoes to fill, right? You start with Andrew Makuba at safety. And man, Connor, picking up bad time. Well, I do a hit, and now like I'm getting calls. I got people calling me. It's like, guys, you had all day to call me. Now you want to start calling me, but nevertheless,
You're a
uh,
popular guy. That's because of how great you are with all this stuff.
I
They want to hear
appreciate that.
you.
I appreciate that. Andrew Makuba, of course, drafted in the second round by the Philadelphia Eagles. He, really was a steadying force in that secondary, because you talk about how the safety play was in 2023. That was the Achilles heel for Texas, right? Jaron Thompson, Jalen Catalon, Keaton Crawford, others. They stabilize it. Michael Taff, the returner, the mainstay, and then you get an Andrew Makuba. The defense excels to another level. I'm going to give you a name to keep an eye on. Makuba was an all-around safety, not the biggest guy, about 5'11", 195. Jelani McDonald, 6'2", 205, describes his game, excuse me, as physical and violent, known as one of the hardest hitters on the team. I'm really interested to see what dynamic he's going to bring to the secondary, right? Because Taft is more of a finesse guy. Taft can lay the wood too, more of a coverage guy. Real interested to see what Jelani McDonald can do. Now, of course, you got to replace Jade Barrett, right? That's the star, the Jim Thorpe Award winner. You can't replace a guy like him who was such a smart player, high IQ, jack of all trades. Malik Muhammad, was a four-star recruit coming out of Oak Cliff, if memory serves me correct. Yeah, he's an Oak Cliff kid from Dallas.
Yeah, okay.
The ceiling for him is high, really high, and they expect him to feel like a number one corner. If he can do that, and they get Jalen Gilbo, who's going to slide outside from star to the outside corner spot, Texas secondary would be in good shape.
So overall, Eric, I mean, obviously this team is talented enough to win a national championship. So there's a difference between asking the question, can they and will they? So if you had to put out like a single simulation of the 2025 season, what do you think is the most likely scenario for the Longhorns this coming fall?
I think the most likely scenario, quite frankly, is them playing for an SEC title, them reaching the college football playoff. And then the question is, will they be able to find that little bit extra that they've been missing that can get them out of the semifinal round and into the national championship game?
Eric, it's really incredible. We've interviewed a lot of these a lot of these top programs this summer, and it's pretty much that same question for what 6, 7, 8 teams this year. They are a lot of teams are talented enough to win it all this year, but it's like, can they cross that threshold of being elite to being in their own tier, so to speak. And that's going to be a question for Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Notre Dame, you name it. I mean, there's just a lot of teams that'll be in the running to make a deep run in the playoff this year. Eric, really good job. As you were just saying several minutes ago, you're getting a lot of calls, so I'll let you go here. But one last time for our viewers, please tell them where they can find your content.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Eric C. Henry _. And of course, my Texas football, basketball, and baseball coverage at Horns 24/7 on all social media, horns247.com.